Hey everyone, welcome back to Simming History, where we look at the history of architecture through the lens of The Sims. Before we get started today, if you like the video, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. It helps out the channel. Today, in the third episode in a series on ancient Egypt, we are looking at the New Kingdom pharaoh Hatshepsut. Following the 8 dynasties of the Old Kingdom, there was a period of upheaval, resulting in the deunification of Egypt and a return to the tribal or feudal ways. This period ended when one governing official basically forcibly reunified Egypt and formed what has become known as the Middle Kingdom. Architecturally, the Middle Kingdom is noteworthy really just for its change in burial practice. Gone were the days of mastabas and pyramids. Now there were tombs carved directly into the cliffs, and instead of pyramids, the pharaohs built large mortuary temples. These temples were symmetrical, multi-storied column complexes, and the best remaining example is the temple of Mentuhotep II in Deir Bahari. Eventually, the Middle Kingdom also fell to a foreign invader, the first successful invader of Egypt in centuries. These kings, known as the Hyksos, brought metallurgy, 2-wheel chariots, new gods, and new weapons. Eventually, they were expelled, and the New Kingdom was founded, which brought a new emphasis on hereditary political and religious rule. Which brings us to the third pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, the first dynasty of the New Kingdom. His name was Thutmose I, and he ruled around 1500 BCE. At the time of his death, his high queen had not given him a son, so a son was chosen from one of the lesser wives, in this case, a boy that would eventually take the name Thutmose II. And he was married to the eldest daughter of the high queen, Hatshepsut. This was fairly standard practice when a pharaoh's high queen did not produce a son. Thutmose II and Hatshepsut ruled together for 14 years before his death, and a son was chosen among his lesser wives. This son would eventually become Thutmose III, but he was a baby, and as the highest-ranking member of the royal family, Hatshepsut became the regent for her stepson/nephew. The regent Hatshepsut introduced several reforms, not the least of which was appointing commoners to official posts because they were suited to the position, rather than filling that position by nepotism. This created a court of officials who were loyal to her for their jobs. As a result, when she announced she wanted to be co-pharaoh rather than just regent, everyone just kind of went along with it. And it didn't end there. Eventually, Hatshepsut changed her name to Maatkare, changed how she was physically depicted in statuary with a beard, and even changed her heritage, declaring she was the child of the god Amun, who had presented himself to her mother in her father's form. Given her power grabbing and the reputation of ancient cultures, you may think she had her nephew killed at this point to finalize her grasp on power. But she did not. Hatshepsut saw to it that her nephew had a full education in politics, religion, and military. An education that would be required for him to one day take the helm himself. While he was busy being educated, her 20-year reign was marked with military success, peaceful trading programs, and public construction projects. Obelisks were a real thing during this era. And yet, despite this success, no one knew about her until the 18th century. Because 20 years after her death, during the solo reign of her stepson/nephew, Thutmose III, all of her iconography was destroyed, or enough to cause 18th century archaeologists to have some real heartburn. You see, they didn't quite get everything. Some carvings remained on her Mortuary Temple, and they just didn't make sense when compared to the official story. So let's talk about the constructions of the pharaoh Hatshepsut. Like all the other pharaohs of her era, she commissioned her fair share of obelisks, and we do need to talk about them. They're very iconically Egyptian. Obelisks are monuments with tapered sides that are topped with what looks like a tiny pyramid. They have relief carvings on its side, and they're carved out of one giant piece of stone. So if somewhere along the process of the carving or the relief carving goes wrong and the stone cracks, it's abandoned. Once it's completed, though, it's lifted up out of the sand and put into place. There are obelisks all over the world, including one in New York City in Central Park. That obelisk, fittingly, was commissioned by Thutmose III, the nephew/stepson of our pharaoh Hatshepsut. But today we're building the Mortuary Temple of Queen Hatshepsut, which sits directly next to the Mortuary Temple of the Middle Kingdom pharaoh Mentuhotep II, and absolutely dwarfs it. Hatshepsut's temple is multi-terraced and multi-story, with extensive colonnaded halls. The terraces boasted large pits planted with trees that were fed with water with underground irrigation pipes. On the upper terrace, the colonnaded halls have relief carvings that depict her divine birth on the right, and her trade expeditions to Punt on the left. Also in the upper terrace level, there is a mortuary chapel, as well as spaces dedicated to the gods Amun, Anubis, and Harthor. Like its smaller Middle Kingdom neighbor, it's fairly symmetrical. But this is not the burial site of Hatshepsut, only where she would have been remembered and worshipped after death. Like all pharaohs of this time, Hatshepsut was aware that the tombs of the Old Kingdom, including the pyramids, had already been ransacked by grave robbers, and so to ensure the security of their eternal resting place, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom are buried in hidden rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Hatshepsut's tomb, KV-20, was discovered in the 18th century and excavated in the 19th and 20th centuries. Studies on her mummy, including scans, show that she probably died of cancer. So, an unfortunate, non-dramatic end to a woman who led a very dramatic life. Thanks for joining me today as we look at the constructions of the Pharaoh Hatshepsut. I'll see you next time as we close out the series on Egypt with the temple at Karnak. Until then, you can find me on Instagram at Simming History and on the Sims 4 gallery, where there are playable versions of many of my builds. I'll see you all next time. Until then, bye!